We all use it, but how often do we consider the consequences? I'm talking about social media and whether too much time spent using it could actually be bad for us. While studies show that some online connection can be beneficial to teenagers, several others point to a rise in anxiety, loneliness, and depression. And in the most extreme cases, the excessive use of social media has been linked to suicides. Recently, a UK court ruled that a 12-year-old schoolgirl, Jessica Scatterson, who took her own life in 2017, had what was described as intense social media activity in the days before her death. So, does social media pose a risk to our mental health? Well, to discuss this, let's go to our panel of experts in the UK who've studied social media use and its impact on teenagers. I'm joined from Colchester by Cara Booker. She's a researcher at the Institute for Social and Economic Research at the University of Essex. And in Leicester, we have Michelle O'Reilly, a senior psychology lecturer at the University of Leicester. I thank you both for joining us. Let's focus on young people, especially teenagers. Michelle O'Reilly, is social media directly responsible for teen suicide?
I think it's a bit of a leap to say it's directly responsible for teen suicide. I think suicide is actually quite a complex issue related to mental health issues in children and young people, and no single factor can be held responsible in such a direct way. However, it can certainly be a contributing factor for some more vulnerable groups of young children and young people. So it's certainly something we should be paying attention to, but blaming it so directly is probably inappropriate.
So, Cara Booker, can we say, firstly, would you agree with Michelle? And if we dial it back a little bit, if you are susceptible or vulnerable, is social media a bad thing for you because it might push you over the edge?
I completely agree with what Michelle said, that we can't say that there's any real causation. There's been correlation studies, but we can't directly say that social media is causing an uptick in suicides or is, I think we can say that in certain cases, maybe that there is a link between social media and well-being, but I don't think that we can say that it's necessarily directly related to to suicide.
Yeah, and I appreciate your commitment, both of you, to the empirical research out there and saying, you know, it's just too early to tell. We don't absolutely know for sure. Michelle, teenagers, boys will be boys. They'll bully other boys. They'll gang up on people. They'll bully girls. They'll slut shame them, if you like. Girls will gang up on other girls and be mean and so on. But when we add a digital space to that, and we add the narcissism and the need for validation and all of that, does it make it too much for a young mind to handle?
I mean, there is certainly evidence that suggests that cyberbullying has a greater impact on children's mental health than just face-to-face. So there is some truth in that statement to an extent. But what I guess we have to remember, what happens is for most cases of bullying, the young person is being bullied in the physical space, in the playground, in the school, and then they go home and that gets extended beyond the school environment and they get bullied online through social media. And so what happens is you get a much more sustained impact of the bullying than we used to get before social media came to be. So the cyberbullying studies do suggest that actually the intensity and duration of the bullying is what is the issue, because the child can't escape from those nasty comments, from those mean online comments. Right. And that's what makes it a little bit more impactful than the good old days where it was just in the playground. Yes.
Right. Okay, so Cara, we can't compartmentalize anymore because that just continues. We're in the matrix. You have your smartphone on all the time. You have your iPad at home. This thing just never ends. Is that it?
I think that's true. I mean, if you look at the average amount of time that young people are on social media, it's, you know, somewhere between 3 and 4 hours, and that seems like a lot, and it is a lot. And so, you know, we're always checking, and it might not be constant. It's constant throughout the day. So you might check in the morning when you get up. You may or may not be allowed to have your phone at school, but you might try and sneak in a few minutes here or there. And then when you get home and you're not with your friends, you're constantly contacting them. So I do think that it is one of those things where it is it's much more constant in our lives lives than anything else has been.
Right. Cara, as we're trying to figure out how to handle this, are we in uncharted terrain here? Do we actually know what the balance is, especially for teenagers?
I don't think we do, and I think this is kind of a two-pronged issue. We as adults are looking at young people on social media all the time and kind of assuming that it's a bad thing. And when you talk to young people, you tend not to get the same picture. So I think that we don't exactly know what's going on. Social media might be part of the picture of why young people have lower well-being, but I don't think it's the full picture. And I think that we need to kind of look outside of it to see what else might be contributing to that.
Michelle, does it differ according to gender, broadly speaking?
I mean, there are some gender differences, but what we have to account for there is that there are also gender differences in terms of mental health conditions and the kinds of issues that girls face against the issues that boys face. The kind of research that we do have available shows that boys are much more likely to use YouTube and watch videos and play on video games, whereas girls are more likely to use the communication channels like Snapchat and Instagram. But it's a bit patchy. Our knowledge of the gender differences, there's certainly a need to do more research there.
Right. Cara, I mean, I'm going to use this opportunity to disclose that my daughter just opened an Instagram account, right? And I'm a bit worried about it, right? So on the story feature, she posted this thing yesterday where people are supposed to rate her, whether they think she's chill or mean, pretty or ugly, smart or dumb, etc., right? And it was shared, and you could see people's ratings, and thankfully, all her friends all thought wonderful things of her, all her classmates, I guess, and her cousins, right? But I wondered what happens then if somebody says you're ugly, you're dumb, you're mean, for a 13-year-old girl. Is that a perfect recipe for a problem to start? Because this is just so easy, where you're throwing stuff out there on Instagram.
I think it can be an issue, and I think this might be where parents come into play. I mean, you may not know everything that's going on, but if you see something like that, you may have a conversation with your child about what it means when somebody gives you a negative comment, or how to express themselves if they're starting to feel bad due to those comments. So yeah, I think if the children are taking this in without fully understanding what the context is and how to appropriately deal with any issues that they might have in dealing with the feelings that might come with negative comments, then I think that's where it might go down the road to having poor well-being.
So Michelle, does it boil down to just having mature conversations with your kids as a parent and taking it on a case-by-case basis, whether in the digital space or outside of it?
Parents certainly do play a role. I mean, I think, again, the research has shown that young people with parents who are open and communicate with their child certainly fare better than those who just ban social media from their child's life or are closed off to those kind of conversations. But I think we need to remember it's not just parents' responsibility, it's society's responsibility. Teachers play a role as well in educating children about how to stay safe online. The community plays a role, the government certainly plays a role. So it's never just down to one individual. Right. In terms of their responsibility, we're all playing a role in what these young people think. And again, the teenagers we talk to, they're quite aware that negative comments come their way. It doesn't have to have a detrimental effect. It can, and it does for some, and some children are more vulnerable to those negative comments than others. But also, it's part of young people's life. They get negative comments in all kinds of environments. It's about how well equipped they feel they can cope with them, and the intensity of those comments, and who's making them, and for how long. So there's lots of things going on there.
Right. And Cara, I come from a generation where we would play video games in the arcade. We'd play Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat and shoot 'em up games, right? And back then, there was this fear that, especially when boys play those games, you're going to turn out to be violent and you'll become someone who'll go and shoot up people later on, right? And so there were studies supporting that and so on. That was part of the debate of the time. Are we just having a similar debate now where you have some people who are all or nothing? They're saying either social media is completely bad or it's a total liberation, yet the answer's somewhere in the middle.
I think the answer is somewhere in the middle, but I do feel like we're having the same debates over and over again. Every time some new piece of technology comes out, we have to debate whether it's good or bad. You know, there's all of this debate about television and how television was bad for you. And in some cases, it has shown that it's had some negative effects, especially people just sitting down and being sedentary. But on the other hand, it showed that it brought many families together because they were able to come around a specific program and have a chat about that, or watch something at the same time together. So I don't think I don't think any of this is either one or the other. It's somewhere in the middle. And yes, we kind of are rehashing the same old things about new technologies and how we deal with them and how they fit into our lives.
Michelle?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think sometimes it depends on the child, on the young person, how vulnerable they are to particular effects. And sometimes it depends how resilient they are and how well they're able to cope. They can certainly use social media in positive ways. We've found that with the young people we've been talking to, that it can de-stress them. It helps them to cope with the other pressures and demands on life. And I guess, you know, social media is quite a new thing. We're catching up. So in the research world, we're trying to catch up and learn about this phenomena. And the same in society, parents are trying to catch up with what's going on in their kids' lives. So there's certainly more work to be done to understand this issue better.
Would you, Cara, regulate social media or regulate it further given the available evidence on its impact on young people?
Given the available evidence, I wouldn't. I think there's so much that we don't know. We don't know a lot about the content that young people are watching and how that might have any association or impact on their well-being, the context in which they're doing it, whether they're creating content or whether they're just casual watchers. I think there's a lot more questions that need to be answered before we can make a definitive decision for an entire generation and generations to come about what we do with social media.
Michelle, be cautious about regulation because we just don't know.
I think we do need to be cautious, because I think that the risk is if you over-regulate, you actually take away some of the support systems for some children. So, you know, the idea about self-harm is that it, you know, if we stop children communicating about self-harm online, we'll solve the problem, but that's simply not true. You know, some young people who are self-harming are using social media to actually get support, get help, learn about it. And you risk taking that away. So yes, on one hand, it could make the case worse for some, but it might make it better for others. And until we have a better understanding of these complex issues and these relationships, I think if we could step in too quickly.
Okay. It's been an interesting discussion with both of you, Cara Booker and Michelle O'Reilly. I thank you both for joining us here on the Newsmakers.